Welcome to the Heidi Thorne Show. I'm your host, Heidi Thorne, and in this podcast, I share my real-world self-publishing and small business experience with you. So let's get started with today's show. Now, today is a continuation of the discussion of the 2018 Self-Publishing Survey. And as I mentioned in the previous episodes, we were going to look at some of the factors that could affect your self-publishing income. And the factor that we're going to talk about today is gender. Now, in 2016, we didn't have as many men as in 2018. So I was really glad to see that we had more men participating, because in 2016, it was heavily skewed towards women. And this year as well, we had 60%, around 60% were women, and 37.5% were men. So I was really glad to see that we had more men, because last time in 2016 we had only about 22% were men. So this year we had a lot more men participating. So I was really glad to see that. But even with that, I had to question, why do we have that high of a participation level for women? Now, I could have explained that in 2016 because I did a lot of outreach to my personal network, and I do a lot of networking in women's groups. So it would be expected that I might have a lot more women in that survey. But this year, I still had a pretty high participation level for women, about 60%. So I looked at my Facebook advertising, and I didn't indicate that I wanted any particular gender, because with Facebook, you can really target specific groups. And I kept it extremely broad. I wanted 18 to 65 plus in terms of age. I wanted them in the United States. And I didn't indicate any other factor other than that they had to have an interest in writing. And so I looked at the stats for my Facebook advertising, and when I looked at both the reach and click results, it was skewing female, about 66 to 80%, depending on which campaign I was looking at, were being seen and responded to by women. And you have to think, well, Facebook knows a lot about everyone. So you have to wonder, are more women self-publishing than men? Now, the survey that I did, you just can't tell. I don't know, but I've seen it now for 2 years, or 2 surveys, I should say, where it is skewing female. And so I have to wonder, are more women self-publishing? And we just don't have any real clear data on that. All we have are these surveys, so it's really very hard to tell. But here's the interesting thing. In standard employment, there's a lot of discussion always about the gender pay gap. And, are women making more than men, or vice versa? And what I found with this survey is that there is no gender gap. I split up the data in terms of, women versus men. And the most popular income response for both women and men was $1 to $99 in income. So we're not seeing any issues there. And then in terms of the most popular forecast, we're looking at 1,000 to 5,000 for next year's income forecast. So, and they were like dead on for both men and women. So I'm not seeing a real gender gap if I'm just looking at the survey data. And what I did too is I drilled down a little bit further. I did some additional statistical testing, population variance kind of stuff, just to see if, the raw data that I was seeing could be um, applicable to the larger population. And even with those types of tests, I was seeing no gender gap whatsoever in terms of self-publishing income. We're all making very little income. So I don't think it really matters. So it doesn't seem to be, so gender does not seem to be a big issue, at least according to my survey data. Gender does not seem to be a factor that affects what you make in terms of self-publishing income. So actually, I mean, I think that's really good news. Even though the income levels that people were reporting, regardless of gender, weren't that stellar, I'm really glad to see that there isn't a big gap between the genders, because if there is, that could signal a couple of different things. First of all, there's no real advantage. When you're using systems like Amazon KDP or Lulu or whatever self-publishing platform you use, they don't screen for gender when you use them. So it would be, there's no issues with the platform itself. But the one thing that would have concerned me if I had seen dramatic difference between the genders in any of the survey analysis that I did, if I had seen a difference, I would be extremely concerned, because that means that, especially if it's, one is dramatically underpricing themselves, that would be a big problem. So, such as if women, because the pay gap is still there, if women were underpricing themselves, that would be an issue, because that means that they don't quite understand their value, or they don't value their work. And so I was extremely encouraged to see that there wasn't a gender pay gap when it comes to self-publishing income, at least according to my survey data. So I hope you have found that encouraging, regardless of whether you're a guy or a gal. And if you did, I would appreciate it if you would wander over to iTunes and give this podcast, The Heidi Thorne Show, a nice rating and review. And while you're there, of course, don't forget to subscribe to The Heidi Thorne Show so that you can get more insights on this self-publishing survey. And in case you're not on iTunes, I'm also on Stitcher and Podbean. And if you want to just view the video instead, it's on YouTube. And if you want to listen to the podcast on your Alexa device, you just have to use the AnyPod Alexa skill to listen to my podcast. And of course, if you have author friends, definitely share these self-publishing survey podcast episodes with them on social media. Now, if you want to connect with me, my website is HeidiThorne.com, and my books, my self-published books, are available on Amazon, and my audiobooks are available on Audible and iTunes in addition to Amazon. So thank you so much for listening and for your support. I'll look forward to talking to you again in the next episode, and in the meantime, have a great day.